This episode of the Creep Street Podcast is brought to you by Martini Coffee Roasters. You know, people always look at me weird when I say I start off every morning with a big old martini. But then I set them straight, and I tell them I'm talking about Martini Coffee Roasters coffee. A delicious coffee made by the Martini family. They roast their coffee using a traditional method of sight and sound to roast those little babies to perfection. And they also sell green coffee beans for those home roasters out there. And right now, fans of the Creep Street Podcast can get 20% off their entire order by using the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Once again, for 20% off your order, use the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Martini Coffee Roasters, the perfect coffee to keep you creeps caffeinated.
You've taken a wrong turn down Creep Street.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
And you have arrived at the main event. Welcome one, welcome all. Shuffle on in. Come on.
Come on.
Come on.
Where are your tickets?
Yep, let's see.
Open your purse.
Get on in here. Get on here. Dump it out. Let's see. If you got any stray pills, we'll take them.
Yeah, let me see your backpack.
Yeah, come on.
Put your phones off.
Hey,
unless you're listening to this on your phone.
I got my eye on you, pal. You're in for a full cavity search.
Oh.
All right.
We never said Creep Street.
Oh, that's right. You welcome to the Creep Street Podcast.
It's Creep Street, baby.
That's right. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. That chill you feel, the goosebumps you've got, that means you are in the right place, citizens.
Yes.
Now, let's get a little housekeeping done up top. Of course, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Creep Street Podcast, Twitter or X at Creep Street Pod. We are also on TikTok at Creep Street Podcast.
We're on Threads.
Oh, that's right. Threads. Quite a bit of followers on our Threads as well.
Thank you for that. We're on Pinterest.
Oh, that's right. Momo's been working on our dang Pinterest.
I don't know. It's just kind of a fun little side project for me.
And we've been cooking up also some merchandise. We've been working on logos and art and imagery to put on our new products and everything. Mm-hmm. Very excited about all that. Now, folks, if of course you're not getting enough Creep Street,
right?
You know, you get the mainline episode, and then we have an off week where we do the mini-sode, the little check-in, the homeowners association.
Of course.
But let me tell you, I get it. If that's not enough.
I mean, it's just not.
If that's not enough, you know what? Hey, loosen that belt buckle.
Yeah.
Shovel in a big old spoonful of Creep Street. If you need more, head on over to patreon.com/Creep Street Podcast. That is patreon.com/Creep Street Podcast.
Yeah, we got some good shit going on over there.
Now, Maureen.
Yeah.
Today's episode is one that has long been in the making.
It has. And thank you for your patience, everyone. This is just a big, bad topic. You know, I wanted to make sure we really got in there. So we're doing it now. And here on Creep Street, we don't usually do trigger warnings.
I know.
Because it's usually kind of like,
it's a given.
It's just a kind of apparent by the topic of each episode what it is. So it's kind of its own trigger warning.
Exactly.
This one here, we're doing it.
Oh, yeah.
So I will give you a heads up before anything. I'll say like, hey, something's really, intense is going to happen. So you'll have a heads up in case that's hard for you.
Yes.
But also just at the top. Just to be, I don't want to push anyone away, of course, but I just want to be honest, okay? Trigger warning for the following things. Death, witnessing death, painful death, death of a child, intense injury, and cannibalism.
And I'm going to say the child thing especially, I think the reason why we're issuing this little warning up front is because obviously death, all that stuff, we talk about it all the time on Creep Street.
Right.
But there, unfortunately, this tragedy also involved children. I mean, it was bad enough that adults suffered this way, but children obviously suffered too in this case. So very heavy stuff. But like I said, this one has been a long time coming, and not just the research, the actual research, if you have a podcast like this, eventually you're going to do the Donner Party.
Of course. We've just been waiting for the right time.
There's a number of those out there that we have still, almost 4 years in now, there's big ones. Jack the Ripper.
Ted Bundy,
Ed Gein, the list goes on, and that's just serial killers we're listing. That's not even listing UFOs, cults, hauntings that are kind of staples of those I guess genres. I guess you would say. It feels weird to call serial killers a genre, but
it is
that subject, that category.
Yeah. Just a quick thing. I just remembered this is going to be a 2-part episode. So just a heads up, there is no cannibalism in this episode. Next episode.
Yes.
Just wanted to make that clear.
Now, Maureen, let's go ahead and pull the Band-Aid off.
Yeah.
Let's pull the cover off the covered wagon, if you will.
I will. Everybody, here we go. You are invited to the Donner Party, Volume 1.
Oh boy, oh boy.
Yeah, this is a big one, folks. I know we have a lot of listeners that are not from the United States, and I'm curious to hear if they have, if they've heard of this before, or if this is more of a famous thing just in the States. I don't know.
And that's a good point, Maureen, because I think if you've grown up here, even if you're not sure exactly what the Donner Party is, or there is a negative connotation.
Yeah, it's like scary.
And it's been referenced countless times in popular culture. The first one that comes to mind is at the beginning of The Shining. Yeah. When they're driving to the hotel and little Danny asks Jack Nicholson, he goes, what's cannibalism?
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Even if you aren't really sure what the Donner Party is, it carries this negative connotation. Now, kind of like what Maureen said about children being involved, and granted, there's a lot of time that has passed and everything. Right. I think when you first think of the Donner Party, especially if you know what it's about, your mind automatically goes to the nasty stuff, the gore, the awfulness. When you actually learn the background and you actually humanize the people involved, it becomes a horror story on so many levels. It is a horror story that is just so human.
Totally.
It is a human horror story. It is a story of endurance, of
survival and family, and making tough decisions. It's really
and then having to live with those decisions, especially if you survived this ordeal.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not like if you survived, you were free and clear. It's not like the rest of your life was great. This really obviously negatively affected all the survivors as well.
Many of them were essentially a shell of their former selves afterward. It's awful stuff, but I think, I've rambled on enough.
Oh, come on.
Let's go ahead. Let's hear those dang sources.
All right, we got 2 books today. One is a kind of, graphic novel a graphic book / kind of comic book. It's from the series called Hazardous Tales by Nathan Hale, and this one is called Donner Dinner Party.
I would.
We're having fun.
We're having fun.
Everyone's long dead, so it's okay.
Right. And honestly, we were very tempted. What was it? We were very tempted to name this episode The Donner Party Volume 1, The Appetizers.
Yeah.
But we realized, hey, maybe that's
not.
a bit much.
Yeah. Maybe, yeah. Exactly.
Especially when kids are involved. We were like, let's maybe pump the brakes on that.
Yeah. But I will give it up for that, and...
Yeah, that was on you. That was you.
Yeah, I'm going to brag. That was my idea.
Yes.
I am a demon.
And you even considered naming Volume 2 Just Desserts. But
which would be bad because no one got their just desserts.
No one did.
Yeah.
No one did.
But this book, Donner Dinner Party, it's very good. I would recommend it, especially if you have like a young teen, like maybe you have like someone that's like 13 or 14 that's like interested in this and stuff. It's like kind of a good way to get the story, but it doesn't go into like all of the horrors of it. It's not so graphic. But our main source today, and I cannot recommend this book enough, it is by Daniel James Brown, and it is called The Indifferent Stars Above.
Yes.
Truly, I think this might be my favorite book that I have read for Creep Street Podcast.
I am excited to read it. And a fun fact that you told me, the author is actually was related to one of the people that was involved in the Donner Party.
Yeah, it's kind of confusing, and I'll explain it when we're, going through it. The author's relative wasn't a part of the tragedy of the Donner Party, wasn't a part of that whole thing, but was with them early on and then ended up taking another route. But so it's very interesting, very interesting. So our story today takes us all the way back to the 1800s. Now, between 1840 and 1860, about 300,000 or 400,000 settlers came from the East or the Midwest and traveled west to get that good land, to prosper, for all sorts of good stuff.
That's right. It was manifest destiny, as they say.
Yeah, they kind of thought that everything over there was just kind of up for grabs, which is incorrect.
Yeah.
Obviously, there were people already there. No one was discovering anything, but this is what was happening. So they were going out there to start a new life. And it's interesting because some of you may have played the game Oregon Trail or Oregon Trail on your computers back in the 90s.
Yeah.
And it's a lovely game. And it does kind of show you that it was tough. People did die of dysentery all the time.
Shout out to the song Dysentery Gary by Blink-182.
Incredible. Now, I always kind of thought that when I was picturing people going west on covered wagons, I kind of just thought it was just a family, that they had one covered wagon with their stuff and the family just was, going for it. And I also kind of thought that everyone was in the wagon. This is not the case. It was families. Sometimes they just had one wagon. Sometimes it was just a couple people or a single person and they didn't have a wagon at all. And sometimes, the families with multiple wagons, they had teamsters, people they hired to drive those other wagons. And it wasn't just, like I said, one family or group at a time. It's called a wagon train, where it's like a bunch of groups, a bunch of families all travel together.
Right.
And it's kind of like a strength in numbers kind of thing.
Absolutely, yes.
And it's interesting because that was a very big fear for people during this time, was being attacked by Native Americans. But actually, it was not that common for that to happen, for these people to either kill the settlers or steal their livestock or kill their livestock or whatever. It actually wasn't that common, but it happened in this case.
Yes, it certainly did happen, obviously.
Yeah, we'll see it here, and it's tough. It's tough. And, as I was saying too, it wasn't just people that were going forward and doing this. Sometimes it was close to 100 people, and they had just a ton of oxen, just, 3 or 4 double oxen yokes deep, pulling these damn covered wagons.
Yeah.
Tons of cattle, horses. I mean, it was a whole big deal. And also, most people walked, actually.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
And then
That's insane.
And then you think, you got your Xbox.
Yeah.
You got your flat screen. Mm-hmm. You got your Funko Pop collection.
I mean, you gotta have it.
I mean...
What are you supposed to do, leave that in Illinois?
No. You're taking that to the new world.
Yeah. But... funny you mentioned that, because it is wild to me, I don't get it, that people really did pack so much stuff when they were going. And some things I understand. You need a ton of food, you need tools to repair things, pots and pans and whatever. Shit you really need, and it's heavy, and I get it.
And if you're part of a caravan of 5 families, that shit's gonna add up.
Yes. But it's also funny too, they would a lot of people brought, fabrics, furniture, bed frames, some stuff like that. And it's you'll see here that these people are very handy, they really can take care of themselves. It's weird to me. I'm why don't you just make a fucking bed frame once you're in California, you goose?
Well, also, something, I don't know why I just never thought of it, but it was interesting to learn was, when you think of a covered wagon, you think of just the humble, regular old covered wagon. Mm-hmm. Well, just like cars today that come in, a more affordable sedan to a more luxury high-end vehicle, there was also that version of covered wagons.
Yes.
Some folks had double-decker wagons that even had stoves on the inside and bookshelves and Like
one of the wagons in this story was like that.
Yes, yes. I did, and that was just something I didn't think about. You know,
yeah, I know. Isn't that interesting?
If you had money back in the day, I mean, you were rocking the Cadillac of covered wagons.
Absolutely. And some people are just out there with, a Nissan Cube.
Which, hey, we love a good cube.
Oh, love a cube. Now, even though traveling in these covered wagons out west was very dangerous, only 4% of people traveling west in covered wagons actually died during the 1840s. But that's still like 20,000 people that died, and they just had to kind of like quickly bury them in wherever they were. So lots of times on the route, there was just like strewn out corpses that animals have dug up from these shallow graves. You would see, bones everywhere. Not the whole time, but it was rough. It was rough.
Well, imagine it's already awful enough to say goodbye to a loved one when they pass.
Yeah.
Imagine having to say goodbye to someone who dies, bury them, and then leave that grave that you probably will not ever see that grave again.
Yeah, you'll never go back. Yeah.
That's awful.
Isn't that crazy?
Because at least traditionally you can at least visit their
the
graves.
grave or whatever. Yeah, I know.
I mean, that's got to be the most soul-wrenching thing.
And I'm glad you brought that up too, because it's so easy to think of these people because they were in a way kind of like quote unquote used to it, like expecting that people die. Sometimes children don't make it out of childhood. Like, even though they knew that was happening and in that way they were like quote unquote used to it, they still were people. And they still loved their kids and loved their families. And it was, these decisions were heart-wrenching for them. And it was like incredibly emotional. It's not like people just were like, too bad she died. It's like people still really, grieved just like we do.
Right, exactly.
Now, of course, disease from unsanitary conditions was a really big issue, and it's not their fault necessarily. It's just the nature of the game. There's not always water nearby, or the water that is nearby is not clean. That was kind of a big part of it, and that was actually a huge problem during the gold rush of 49.
Yes.
But that was a few years ahead of this.
Yeah. I mean, hey, if the wagons are rocking, it's probably typhoid.
And maybe you should knock and help, but wear a hazmat suit.
Yeah. But also, I mean, most Americans probably know this, but if that is where the famous, the San Francisco 49ers, the football team, where that name comes from.
Exactly.
The folks who came out west, particularly those during the gold rush.
Looking for that gold,
Looking for that gold, baby.
Gold member, Austin Powers. A million years ago. Okay, so something that really fucked people up and really kind of was a huge issue and where a lot of these injuries or death would happen would be on shortcuts that people tried to take on the trail. Humans are humans. We never change. Of course we want a shortcut. But unfortunately, it usually didn't work out, and you'll see that here shortly. And even though I was just saying, how these people were still people and they had emotions and they cared about each other, it was still really tough and really, kind of survival of the fittest, and really like you had to take care of your own. You had to take care of your own family. Resources were limited, time was limited. You really had to take care of your own family. And oftentimes, if there was someone who was ill, or maybe a woman on the trail whose husband died on the trail and she no longer had a wagon or something and she was just taking care of her kids by herself, she might lag behind, or someone else that's sick might lag behind because they can't keep up, and they would just leave them there.
Yeah.
They would not put them in the wagon because it was too much weight. They wouldn't put them on the horses. It was too much weight. They wanted to keep them as fresh, as possible. And they would just kind of hope that another wagon train would come by before they died to pick them up.
Right.
And it's brutal out there. It is brutal. Now, this journey that we're taking today is 2,500 miles. And this journey with the covered wagons would usually take about 4 months. Our story today took them almost a year.
Jesus. It's amazing anyone was alive.
Oh, it's insane. You will see. It's really like, it is wild. Like the bravery and the courage and just like the will to live for these people.
Yes.
I don't know. I feel like a lot of times I'd just be like, okay, I'm going to die.
Well, and I feel
I'm dead,
like
whatever.
The question too that we'll face obviously later on, more so in part 2, I think we like to think, well, I don't care the circumstances, I would never eat another human being.
Yeah.
I think we like to think that.
But
honestly, there's some people I'd like to eat right now.
come on.
But, you would like to think that. But when put in these dire circumstances, you have no idea what you're capable of.
Exactly. It's like and you'll see this too. It's like the hunger can take over your mind. And you're
Yes.
kind of no longer yourself. You can't help yourself.
Yes.
So, a lot of people in our story today left for California from Illinois. Now, there were a few reasons why people from Illinois and other places in the Midwest area, they were looking to go west. There was something called the, quote, Illinois shakes, which was when people would have these violent shaking fits along with high fevers, chills, headaches, and anemia. This would come about every spring. It would be weird because you would have it for a week and then it'd go away for 2 weeks and then it'd come back and then it'd go like back and forth. And eventually, it wasn't just Illinois. It spread all the way down through the whole Mississippi River area. And it turns out, they of course didn't know this at the time, but it was goddamn malaria.
Good golly.
People were getting malaria from the mosquitoes. Thankfully, the malaria wasn't the type of malaria that will kill you, but they got to people and it was tough. So even though the people living there didn't know that the Illinois shakes came from the mosquitoes, they still fucking hated the mosquitoes. They were so annoying. And there were so many of them because there was a lot of standing water around, a lot of like swamps and stuff. And so sometimes they would smoke out their house, like make their house super smoky with their fireplace. And then they would crawl on their hands and knees under the smoke line into their home and then slam the door shut to hopefully get rid of those mosquitoes. Also, there was just a bunch of other diseases going around, and also winter is fucking brutal. We know that it's happening right now. Also, there was a financial crisis going on at the time. It was kind of a bunch of things caused it, a lot of real estate bullshit, but basically the crops that these people were growing, it was more expensive for them to grow than it was for them to sell it. So when they were hearing all about how amazing California is, they couldn't help themselves. They're very interested.
Of course.
And here is a description of California that many of these people may have heard.
Fine forests in the north, the waters filled with fish, and the plains covered with thousands of herds of cattle, blessed with a climate than which there can be no better in the world. Free from all manner of disease, whether epidemic or endemic, and with a soil in which corn yields from 70 to 80-fold. In the hands of an enterprising people, what a country this might be.
So people were excited. They were like, you know what? It's time. Enough is enough.
And no disease.
There's no disease.
No disease.
No one has ever been sick in California, and we know this.
Ever.
So, these people were getting excited to go, but there was another exciting opportunity within it as well.
Sounds like an MLM.
It kind of is. I mean, it's not, but you'll see it's a fucking bullshit scam. Well, it's not a scam. You'll see, whatever. There was a man named Lansford Hastings. Okay, come on. And he was a mountain man. And he was like a classic, like mountain man, like going through the damn stuff. He was wearing buckskin suits with the fringe, with the fur, boots with the fur, literally.
Boots with the fur.
And, the whole 9 yards. And he traveled through Oregon and California in 1842 and 1843. And he was like, okay, hell yeah, I want a bunch of American settlers to come out to California because he wanted to gain a strong reputation because, he kind of started the whole thing coming over, and also because he created an amazing shortcut that would get them there quicker. And so this, he was hoping, would eventually start a political career for him there. Also, there was an immigrant from Switzerland named Sutter who lived in California. He had a bunch of land, wanted to create like this whole area called Suttersville. And if he brought a bunch of people out there to live in Suttersville, Sutter would give Hastings land, a home, a general store, all that. Now, California at this time was part of Mexico, and American settlers kind of didn't give a fuck, though. It was rude. They basically would just go there. They didn't really consider themselves Mexican. They didn't go through any of the process of becoming a Mexican citizen. They kind of just thought, like, this is mine. Like, I don't even know if they really considered it America. I think they just were like...
Dibs.
Dibs. Yeah, like...
Dibs.
Yeah, so I don't know. And also, Oregon was like, Great Britain, claimed it, and so did, the U.S., and it, just a lot of shit was going on over there. But Hastings was still like, you know what, I'm gonna get people here with my cutoff. It's called Hastings Cutoff. Now, here's a problem with Hastings Cutoff. He never actually took it. He had traveled in the area, but he had never taken this route. He kind of just looked at a map and thought, that should work. And created this whole campaign, and a book was released and all of it. And people really took him for his word and believed him. So, a man named Franklin Graves, one of the men that will be a part of this story, sold his land in Illinois and hid all of the silver coins he got just within the wagon. Like within the wood or whatever of the wagon, really nailing it in there to hide it.
Oh, wow.
He was going for it. Now, there was another man who will be a big part of this story named James Reed. And James Reed was an Irish immigrant. He actually fought in the Black Hawk Wars alongside Abraham Lincoln.
Oh, wow.
Yes. James Reed was the guy that we were mentioning before that had one of these luxury wagons.
Oh.
And also he had a wife that had, quote, sick headaches. Which essentially, she had migraines, is what that was.
Yeah, that's like saying, I own a vehicle car.
Yes, it kind of is. It's a little bit repetitive, but it's good to be thorough, and God bless them. I get migraines sometimes too, and they're actually fucking hell. Now, people needed to make sure they brought the right amount of food with them, but like I was saying, they didn't want to overpack. Once again, I don't know why they're bringing fucking furniture, but whatever. They still didn't want to overpack. And according to Hastings' manual, the Emigrant's Guide, he said that for each adult traveler, you should pack at least 200 pounds of flour, 150 pounds of bacon, 10 pounds of coffee, 2 pounds of sugar, 10 pounds of salt, among a bunch of other things. So those wagons were fucking heavy. And they didn't really, sometimes they had room for some people to go in there, but sometimes there was not room for people to ride in there at all.
Wow.
Now, the Graveses and the Reeds left Illinois, and they met up with a bunch of other travelers in St. Joe, Missouri. Now, this was kind of the kickoff point to get going on your trip out west. And this was your last opportunity to see a doctor, so a lot of people did that. Some women that got there, they actually waited to have their babies delivered there, and then they would head out, which I think was the right call.
Smart for sure.
Yeah. Now, a lot of people in the town of St. Joe, they were adamant and constantly saying, listen, do not leave after May 1st. You're trying to cross the Sierra Nevada, which is, mountains and granite cliffs, and it's wild. It'll be completely impassable with snow. In fact, even Hastings himself said, unless you pass over the mountains early in fall, you are very liable to be detained by impassable mountains of snow until the next spring, or perhaps forever.
Yikes.
Yeah. Now, I don't really know why this happened, but our group here today left on May 23rd. A good amount of time later than the latest time they were supposed to leave. No one really knows why they did this. If my guess is just hubris, especially on the part of James Reed, really thinking that he could just figure it out and it'd be fine. And that's kind of a problem with all of today's story is a lot of the men in here, and I'm not being like, men are stupid. It's just like men were in charge during this time. A lot of the men, they were so independent and they were so self-reliant that they fucked around and found out.
Yeah.
Yeah, they kind of thought that they could do the impossible. They didn't realize how intense it was going to get out there.
Yeah.
They thought they could handle it, but
sometimes the impossible does you.
Oh.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So, there were a good amount of other families with them, but some of the main ones that we'll be talking about today are the Eddies, the Breens, the Graves, the Murphys, as well as multiple Teamsters, cooks, and a few single men. And
ladies.
Truly, though, It really was a ladies' market. I'll tell you that right now. I'll tell you that right now. Good times. But 87 people would comprise what would be the Donner Party or the Donner-Reed Party. James Reed really is at fault here. I kind of feel bad that the Donners got stuck with the name.
Yeah.
But it's just, we'll find out more later. But so yeah, at this point, they're actually with a bunch of other families that are going to go a different route. But the group that is going to go to what we'll find out is now called Donner Lake and experience the Donner Party situation, once again, was 87 people. 46 of them would die.
Wow.
Yes. Now, there was a bunch of stuff going on at the time, too. People were excited about this. There was one woman named Sarah Graves who had just married her husband, Jay Fostick. And during this time, people would have it wasn't necessarily a honeymoon. It was called like a bridal trip or something like that. It basically was like you would go with your family as well as your new husband and just like do a little tour around somewhere. So she actually considered this like her wedding trip.
Oh, God.
And that's very sad. So they were going along. Keep in mind, they were on a trail, but it was still very hard. I always kind of think of it as like, they're just walking along. I mean, they had to move boulders. They had to sometimes like help pull the wagons over hills with the oxen. I mean, it was a lot of work. But they were excited because they thought they were taking this Hastings cutoff, that was supposed to save them 350 miles. However, it actually added 125 miles.
Oh, God.
Yes. Now, they had kind of just got going, and on May 29th, Margaret Reed's 71-year-old mother, Sarah Keyes, died of tuberculosis. And this was kind of a bad call because she knew she was going to die soon. So did everyone in her family. And her idea, or the idea, was kind of like, hey, you're going to die anyway, might as well come along and be with us as long as you can. And then when you die, we'll just bury you.
Yeah.
But, that actually takes a lot of time. There's mourning. They had like a full funeral for her. And also they needed to cross a river. So they were building a goddamn ferry. Can you believe that? They were just building a ferry.
Yeah.
To get these wagons across the river. I mean, insane. But because of all of that, it set them back 5 days. And those 5 days really fucked them hard. But sometimes it kind of was fun. They would all hang out together by the bonfires at night. And it was especially exciting for the young people because, they knew that out west, there was not a lot of people out there, or at least not a lot of white people. And so they knew that their future spouse could be, and probably was, one of the people on this wagon train.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so there was a lot of flirty eyes, a lot of this, a lot of that.
This sounds like a reality show.
I know, it kind of is. I want this to be a TV show, but I'm sure it would just get they would exploit. It would end up being bad, but it could be so good. So Jay Fostick, he pulled out his fiddle and started, playing some tunes. Some people pulled out guitars and they were just playing songs and people would dance and have a great time. One of the Graves' teamsters, John Snyder, he would get up on the rear gate of the wagon and he'd do this little jig and everyone loved it. And he was super popular and gregarious, strong, good looking, and everyone loved him, especially the girls. But Mary Ann Graves and him, they kind of had eyes for each other.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it seemed like maybe something was brewing there. But it wasn't just John Snyder. Everyone had that romance. That romance was in the air.
I mean, in a way, if you are packed like sardines into a place, it's kind of natural that you're going to start feeling an attraction to someone. Essentially, if you're not directly related to them,
they're free game.
Fair game. You're in that close proximity. It's kind of a natural thing. Happened to us on the ship.
I was just gonna say, This Is Us.
Yeah,
starring Mandy Moore. But like I said, romance was in the air. At this point, 3 girls from the Oregon contingent had already gotten married, and 2 more were engaged. There was a member of the Donner Party named Charles Stanton. He was a bachelor from Chicago. Hello. He wrote a letter to his brother, and this is what he had to say.
In their party there were many young ladies. In ours, mostly young men. Friendships and attachments had been formed which were hard to break, for ever since our company is nearly deserted by the young men riding on horseback, pretending to hunt. But instead of pursuing the bounding deer or fleet antelope, they are generally found among their fair Oregon girls. Thus they go every day making love by the roadside in the midst of the wildest and most beautiful scenery.
Honestly,
yeah.
that kind of sounds hot.
Well, here's the thing. It's like, these people at the time, pretty much everyone on the trail was Christian. And Christian. But people be people. Humans are humans, dog.
Yeah.
Sometimes you gotta fuck out of wedlock.
Yeah.
In my book, I think it's fine.
Yes.
If that makes you feel any better, I think it's okay.
I agree.
Yeah. There was, a lot of people getting married, but a lot of, fooling around with each other. And, it is kind of, you're like, we're on the trail. Let's go in the grass and kiss. And a part of it does sound like my nightmare because the bugs, but it is hot though. I understand. And kind of like I mentioned before where I said the men, they were super independent. They did talk to each other, of course, but the women really did get together more, talked more with each other, sharing ideas and kind of thoughts about what was going on, recipes, as well as birth control. Now, getting pregnant on the trail could be the difference between life and death, so people tried to avoid it. And women would use sponges that were dipped in water and had a ribbon attached to it. Sometimes they douched with vinegar, baking soda, and sometimes even mercury. Don't do this. And also it said that people didn't know that women were pregnant until the quickening, aka when the fetus starts kicking and moving around. And the early pregnancy symptoms of, being, morning sickness or just sickness all the time, sore breasts, whatever, that was attributed to menstrual quote unquote blockage.
Huh.
Now here's the thing. I'm fucking certain, and they said this in the book too, that a lot of women, they knew they were pregnant before the quickening. They know. It's come on. These things have been happening for thousands of years.
Right.
It's they know. But it kind of gave them the benefit of the doubt to pretend they didn't know they were pregnant when they did a bunch of stuff to try to induce a miscarriage.
Oh.
So they would horseback ride, they would do vigorous exercise, they drank herbal teas from folk medicine passed down through generations, and there was oil of hemlock. Now, oil of hemlock, a little bit of it could be used to treat a lot of different things, like a sore throat or headache. But if you have enough of it, it will cause intense cramping and a miscarriage.
Oh.
Elizabeth Graves, who was Sarah's mom, she brought it with her on the trail.
Oh.
She knew she had a lot of daughters of childbearing age. Better safe than sorry.
I see.
Yeah. But, it wasn't all kissing and touching each other. There was a lot of struggle, obviously, as we've said. People at this point, too, the ones that weren't falling for each other, were getting pretty annoyed with each other, pretty frustrated, bothered. I mean, most of these people to each other were strangers. They met in Missouri. They'd only known each other for a few weeks. It's not like these are old friends or, their whole family that they're traveling with. It makes sense that some of them didn't click. And especially, people did not like Louis Kesselberg. He was a 32-year-old German immigrant who was seemingly very, very abusive to his young wife, Philippine, who had just given birth to their son. So people were really against this guy. I don't know why they didn't, stop him from, being abusive, but it was the 1800s. So it was so dangerous too, just in general, as we've mentioned on the trail, but it was especially dangerous for kids. Now, I am going to read a list in our book of ways that children could die on the trail. This could apply to anyone. This is so sad and tragic. The length of it is funny. If you laugh, you're not a terrible person. This is directly from the book, The Indifferent Stars Above. Children fell under wagon wheels and were crushed to death or crippled for life. They wandered off into the tall grass and were never seen again. Occasionally, they were abducted by Native Americans. Much more frequently, they drowned when swept away by rivers their families were trying to ford. Drowning incidents were so common, in fact, that some mothers wrote their children's name in indelible ink on labels and sewed the labels into the children's clothes. It didn't prevent them from drowning, but it sometimes allowed a grieving mother to identify a body that had been stuck in the water too long. Children were bitten by rattlesnakes, struck by lightning, trampled by unruly oxen or horses, pummeled by hailstones as large as turkey eggs, and shot by the nearly daily accidental discharge of guns that their fathers carried. They died of measles, diphtheria, whooping cough, influenza, tuberculosis, typhoid fever, malaria, infected cuts, food poisoning, mumps, and smallpox.
Quite a list.
Yeah, so everyone's kind of fucked. And it really does make you think and be grateful that we are living in this time.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, there are so many horrible things in the world today, but we have antibiotics.
Thank God.
I mean, people would die from simple cuts all the time that got infected. And so, you know, gosh dang.
Oh, yeah?
Rough stuff. Now, on June 27th, the wagon train ran into James Kleiman, who was an old military friend of James Reed. They fought in the Black Hawk Wars together. And it was truly like Reed and the squad was going west, James Kleiman coming east, coming back from California, just happened to run into each other as if you would run into someone at the grocery store. And they're like, oh, you know, like, hey, what's up? Like, hello. And James Kleiman is like, listen, absolutely do not take Hastings Cutoff. I just took it for the first time with Lansford Hastings. That was his first time taking it too. And we barely made it. And we're just 2 people on horses, let alone these big wagon trains with oxen and cattle and horses and small kids. It's super dangerous. But for whatever reason, reasons unknown, Reed was just like, nah, we're still gonna do it. It's like one of your friends, someone you trust, said don't do it and you're just still doing it. So, okay. But in the meantime, as they continued on, it truly was beautiful. They were these beautiful vistas, and many people really appreciated them, but in my source, they really especially mentioned Sarah, how she was able to really appreciate this beautiful landscape, you know, these rock formations with the colors and the sunset. I mean, all of these people were from the Midwest, or they had originally emigrated from Germany or France or Ireland or England, and they had never seen anything like this before. They were just completely in awe. So they continue on, you know, it's still really hard. They're having to like dig holes in the ground to find water that tastes bad or it smells like sulfur. And around July 11th, they actually got a letter from Lansford Hastings. Someone, you know, brought it to them. And it said that he would guide them, as well as many other wagon trains that were currently on the Oregon Trail, through his trail, through the Hastings Cutoff. And, you know, because he did take it himself and realized it was much harder than he was anticipating. So he did try to help, and he was like, hey, I'll take people there. I'll help you. So he said, you know, meet me at Fort Bridger, which is the last outpost before we hit California, and then we'll all, you know, go together. So even just the letter alone was enough reason for, you know, you to think, this is bad. This seems like it's going to be really hard. If we take the regular way to California, you know, we'll be there by September. We should just take the regular way. Everyone else disagreed with that. Everyone else was like, we should do this. It's really good. Tamsin Donner, who is one of the Donner wives, there's 2 Donner brothers, she was the only one that said what I just said. She's the only one that said, you guys, this is dumb. We should not be taking this Hastings Cutoff. It's too dangerous, clearly. We need to take the regular way. And everyone else, like all the men, completely shut her down and, you know, said that was dumb and stuff, and that it was like, they're not doing that. And that is my absolute pet peeve, when it's like, you are saying the right thing, but then other people think that you're wrong. And not just like gaslighting you, like trying to like manipulate you, like they actually think you're fucking wrong. It makes me so mad. Right. And I can only imagine how frustrated Tamsin Donner was. So just a few days later, on July 19th, at the, quote, parting of ways, this is where, you know, you turned right, you were taking the way to Oregon, you turned left, you were taking the Hastings Cutoff. And 9 wagons turned left on Hastings Cutoff towards Fort Bridger. This new, smaller group held, you know, a little election to decide who would be the leader of the group. and George Donner was elected as their leader. He was, very well liked. He was a great guy. People were into it. And I am genuinely a little confused because, I don't know if Reed was the leader before or he was just kind of taking over the lead position without really supposed to be doing that. Or I don't really understand exactly how that played out. But I do know that George Donner was elected leader of this group now called the Donner Party. But because James Reed was so involved, some people do call it the Donner-Reed Party, which makes me think of Donna Reed.
Now, a Donna Reed party, I'm all for it.
Gilmore Girls. Rory did it for Dean. She had a little Donna Reed dinner.
Oh, that's right.
There you go.
My gosh.
Now I will read who was a part of the Donner Party. The members of the newly constituted Donner Party were a diverse lot. Most of them belonged to one or another of several large families. 16 Donners split between the families of George and Jacob, 5 Reeds, headed by James, who was Irish-born but of Polish descent, another Irish family of 9, headed by 51-year-old Patrick Breen, and 6 Murphys from Tennessee, a family not headed up by a man but by a widow, 36-year-old Lavina Murphy. Also traveling with the Murphys were Lavina's 2 married daughters, Sarah Foster and Harriet Pike, along with their husbands and children. There were smaller families too. 28-year-old William Eddy, a cabinet maker from Illinois, his wife Eleanor, and their 2 young children, the Kesselbergs with their toddler daughter and newborn son, and another German couple, the Wolfingers. There were also bachelors of various ages and ethnicities. Among them, the diminutive Charles Stanton from Chicago, John Denton, an English gunsmith from Sheffield, an elderly Belgian man named Hardcoop who traveled with the Kesselbergs, Joseph Reinhardt, a German traveling with the Wolfingers, another Irishman, a merry brown-haired, blue-eyed friend of the Breens named Patrick Dolan, the Donners Teamsters, Samuel Shoemaker, Noah James, and a Mexican drover named Antonio, whom they had hired at Fort Laramie. Another German who seems to have worked for the Donners, Augustus Spitzer, 3 Teamsters working for the Reeds, 28-year-old Milt Elliott, James Smith, and Walter Heron, a Reed family servant, Bayless Williams, an albino who stayed in the wagon during daylight hours and did chores around the camp at night. Other than widow Lavina, the only single woman not traveling with her parents or step-parents was the Reeds' nearly deaf cook, Bayless Williams' half-sister, Eliza.
So that's our cast of characters.
Yes, and you don't need to remember everyone's names or anything like that. I just wanted to let you know. It's funny they say diverse in the book, and I know what they mean diverse. It's just so funny because the way that diverse is mainly used, it's they're not diverse. They're almost all white.
Right.
But they come from all different places, these different amounts of people in the family, different ages. It really kind of runs the gamut.
Right, a different kind of diversity.
Indeed. So, that whole squad was on their way to Fort Bridger to once again meet up with Hastings himself, who was going to lead them through this cutoff, and it was going to be great. However, once they got to Fort Bridger, they were too late. Hastings had already left with another, bigger wagon train and guided them through his cutoff. Also, there was a friend or a journalist, I'm not exactly sure who he was, but he saw the wagon train further ahead and saw how insane and difficult and dangerous this quote-unquote shortcut was, and sent a letter back to Fort Bridger for the Donner Party, specifically warning them to absolutely not take this route. But they never got the letter.
Yikes.
Why? Well, it could have been an accident, but the person who ran Fort Bridger, he had a lot to gain if this Hastings cutoff became popular. He ran the trading post, and he would make a lot of money if people were coming and going through that area a lot. So he possibly may have kept the letter from them for that reason.
Wow. I wonder if he ever even knew that what he did caused the misery that's about to unfold.
I think he found out. This was a huge story. I think he put it together that this basically was my fault.
Yeah.
Or partially my fault.
Right. Now, it's not confirmed, but It's also a very likely possibility.
But him, as well as some other people that worked there, they even told the Donner Party how good of a route it was.
Wow.
So yeah, that was true gaslighting. So they continued on, and 2 days later, two 13-year-olds, Virginia Reed and Eddie Breen, they were, horsing around, quite literally. They were on horses, they were running, and Eddie Breen's horse stepped into a prairie dog hole and threw him pretty far, and he broke his leg. And this was like a really bad break, like bones sticking out of your skin bad.
Ugh.
I mean, even if that happens to you today, that's bad. That happening to you then, I mean, you are fucked. You are so fucked, especially out on the trail.
Yeah.
So they sent someone back on horseback to go back to Fort Bridger to get help. And when the person came back, he came back with this like grizzled, experienced mountain man who had amputation equipment.
Oh, God.
Yeah, so he was not a doctor. He was just a mountain man. And he, goes over there. He takes out this huge saw.
Oh.
And Eddie is just screaming. He is so scared. He does not want this to happen. So his parents, they can't handle it anymore. They say, stop. Don't amputate his leg. We can't handle him screaming like it's breaking our heart. Like, please don't. And it's funny because the mountain man looked like kind of like disappointed.
Oh, really?
He's like, I really wanted to amputate a leg today.
Where are they at right now?
I'm not exactly sure. I think they're in Nevada, maybe.
Because sometimes
Utah?
it's just like, why not just make home there?
I thought that so many times too. I'm like, just stop.
Just make home there.
This is good enough.
Make this home.
Yes.
I mean, like if you're already just gonna take land willy-nilly,
Yeah.
just make that home.
For real. I'm sure that did happen. I'm sure some people were like, fuck this. I'm staying in fucking like Kansas or wherever, how far we got. Yeah.
Like,
but
what the fuck?
I think people were just like so excited for California. They were like, it's pilot season. Like, we got to get out there.
Yes. I've got oh my God, I wrote a great pilot script.
Yeah.
Oh.
A spec script. I had my elevator pitch. They needed to get there.
A treatment.
Exactly. So they put Eddie in the back of one of the wagons, one of these like bumpy ass fucking wagons. And he just kind of sat there just in agony. His dad set the bone as well as he could. And that was all you could really do. So they continued on. And at this point, it was actually okay because there were like ruts in the earth that showed them where the earlier wagon train with Hastings had gone. So they were kind of able to follow it. But then they found another note from Hastings. I don't know if it was like on a piece of wood nailed to a tree or like, I don't know exactly how this happened, but on the note, it said pretty much that the road ahead was essentially impassable and that they should send a rider ahead to find Hastings to find out the better route. So James Reed, Charles Stanton, and William Pike, they went ahead and they got to Hastings on August 7th. But he refused to come back with them to the Donner Party, and he kind of just like pointed in the general direction of just where he assumed would be a better route. He really didn't know.
What?
Yeah. So they all headed back to the party, the rest of the wagon train, and they were like, this seems like it's gonna be bad. But I guess he said we should do it, so I guess we'll do it. And it ended up being horrible. It took them 16 days to get through the Wasatch Mountains when the original path would have taken them 7 days.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And this is what I was talking about where they're like hauling up these wagons up steep hills where it's like they're attaching like a ton of oxen to one wagon and they're like pulling it up one at a time. And sometimes people are like at the back of the wagon, literally like with their back to the wagon, like using their legs to like try to help the oxen push it up. They're like cutting down trees that are in their way. I mean, it's bad.
Wow.
So they finally get through and they're finally back on what Hastings Cutoff originally was. And there was another note. They couldn't really read it, it was faded, but what they could make out was 2 days, 2 nights, hard driving, cross desert, reach water. Yikes. So not long after that, they see the Great Salt Desert of Utah.
Oh, God.
Now, this motherfucker is huge, and there is no drinkable water in the zone. You might see water, but it's like, it'll make you ill. It'll make you sick. Yeah, it was tough. It was tough. And so they began their journey across the salt desert. It was so hot during the day, and people started seeing mirages, these optical illusions. And I don't really know how it works exactly, but there was a mirage where they were able to see a reflection of themselves.
Wow.
So like they at first thought like, oh, is there another wagon train over there? And it's like, why are they moving exactly the same way I'm moving? And then they kind of like, two of the men were like, do you see that over there? Kind of like wondering if they're going crazy. And then they're like, it's a mirage, And so it's like, ooh, that's crazy.
Wow.
So they're going across, and obviously because this group has the most shit luck ever, they ran out of supplies. And it took them way longer to get across this desert than they thought. And like I said, it was blazing hot during the day. People were getting sunburned, so dehydrated. The mules, the oxen, the horses, they were literally dying of thirst. Yeah. They, tried their best to give them water, but, there was only so much. Some of them just bolted. Like some of the cattle, they just ran away just in search of water. And, sadly, they probably just died in the middle of the desert.
Right.
But at night, it was absolutely freezing cold. Frigid cold. And at this point, they had already jettisoned some of their things. They were throwing things out, their valuables, their fucking bed frames that they shouldn't have brought in the first place, stuff like that, and burying it in wherever so that they, theoretically could come back and get it, even though that's never gonna fucking happen, to make the wagons lighter for the oxen. And, some people went ahead to try and find water and bring it back. And here, I just want to read a little bit here of a part where the reeds are alone. They're really going through it. They're oxen. They don't have any, and they're stuck. They're basically stuck.
Right.
By the end of the day, their drinking water was almost exhausted. So James and Margaret Reed set out on foot with their children, hoping at least to reach Jacob Donner's wagons some miles ahead. During the night, a bitterly cold wind came up and the salt dust began to fly again. Finally, the Reeds stopped and set their children down on a blanket and piled more blankets and shawls on top of them. The children still complained about the cold. The parents arranged all 5 of the family dogs, Tyler, Barney, Trailer, Tracker, and Cash, on top of the blankets. Then, the elder Reeds sat on the windward side of the children and waited. That really got me when I was reading it. It's like, can you imagine? It's so cold. You have your kids out there. Like, you're trying to keep them warm, but at the same time, you're like, I need to stay warm too because I need to, survive to, keep taking care of them. I mean, oh my God, the stress. So, this was supposed to be a 5-day-long, 40-mile stretch. It ended up taking over 2 weeks and was about 100 miles.
What?
Yeah. People, once they eventually got out of the desert and there was this spring of water there, they were rough. Their lips were split and bleeding, horribly sunburned, and they smelled fucking awful. And there's a whole part of this in the book where it's like, I think a lot of times everyone smelled awful because there weren't a lot of bathing opportunities. They would when they could, but, a lot of the time they couldn't. So they smelled of piss, shit, menstrual blood, and yeast infections.
Oh, man.
This is what I'm saying where I'd be like, I'm just going to die. You know what I mean? Or just I'm over it. I'm
right.
not good. I can't, the will to live. And it's not even got to the bad shit yet.
Oh my God.
It's like, oh my God. So once they got back on the Hastings Cutoff Trail again, from the parting of the ways, it took them 68 days to get there. Whereas the original trail route got them to the same place in 37 days. That's a month longer.
What?
Yeah, I mean, it's it goes from bad to worse the entire time. I mean, it's fucking bad.
I would probably shoot Hastings the moment I ever saw him.
Oh, I know. Everyone now is like, fuck you.
Yeah.
Everyone hates this guy. But once they're on their way, they can see Pilot Peak ahead of them. Well, it's far ahead of them, but they can see it, and there's snow on the peaks. And this made everyone, but especially the mothers, very, very nervous. Now this is happening where it's not common, but of course it happened to these people because they have shit luck. 2 men from the Tamok band of the Shoshones tribe stole 2 oxen and 2 horses. This sucks. It's not the end of the world, but it sucks. So yeah, at this point, people are extra pissed. Everyone's like really mad at James Reed because he really has like been kind of the one that kind of led them into all this bullshit.
Right. Now, Reed was the one with the double-decker wagon, wasn't he? That was that guy, yeah.
He was the one that like his friend was like, hey, don't take Hastings Cut Off. And he was like, nah, I'm going to take it.
Yeah.
Then a very interesting event occurred. A teamster for Graves' family, John Snyder, he was the one that kind of had eyes for Marianne, and he was, handsome and strong. He got his reins of his horse or oxen caught up in Reed's oxen, which was a mistake, but, tensions are high. So, of course, the two drivers, they get in a fight. And they're fighting, whatever, and John Snyder took the butt end of his whip and hit this other teamster in the head. And James Reed completely fucking overreacted and stabbed John Snyder to death.
Wow.
So everyone's like, what the fuck? And it's weird in this area because, in their mind at least, they're in no man's land. This is no one's land. There's no law. There's no government. So it's like up to them to decide what to do. And some of them wanted to hang him right then and there. But eventually it was decided that he would be banished from the group with just a horse and nothing else, which essentially is a death sentence. But afterwards that evening, one of his daughters ran off and found him and brought him some of his guns.
Oh, so he could hunt.
Yeah. Then they continued on, and the Belgian man that I had mentioned before, Hardcoop, this is so sad, but he was, an older man, and he could not keep up. And I think he was also sick as well. And he, wanted to sit in the back of someone's wagon. But everyone was like, we can't weigh down the wagons. No, you have to keep walking. So he just fell behind further and further and further until he was completely out of sight. And when the group made camp for the night, some of the women and some other people were like, hey, someone should go back on a horse and go get him. And the men just said no because they didn't want their horses to be overworked and they wanted their horses to be good for the next day. So that man died.
That's awful.
That's awful. It's so sad. And now the women at this point are fucking pissed.
Oh, I'm sure.
They are so mad at all the men. They're sticking to themselves and they're so mad that the men got them into this fucking bullshit. It's going from bad to worse. Then the Paiutes start invading their camp and stole oxen and cattle, and sometimes would just shoot the oxen with poison arrows, just kind of to fuck with them.
Oh, so not even taking them for
just to
food.
Kill them, just to do it.
Wow.
So the last time when, they just had a few animals stolen earlier, it wasn't that big of a deal, but at this point, it was a big deal. They were stealing a lot, and people were now to the point where maybe they only had one ox or whatever when they originally had 10. What's crazy too was at night, the party could hear the Paiutes in the cliffs laughing at them.
Wow.
Yeah. And Wolfinger, one of the other men, a part of this, his wagon fell behind is because he wanted to hide some of his stuff. He wanted to hide the whole wagon, and the group was like, we don't have time. Basically, it was thought that some of these Paiutes then killed Wolfinger. However, it was Reinhardt and Spitzer. There were these two other German men who went after him and just killed him to steal his money and valuables.
Jesus.
Yes. Now, at this point, they are really, really low on their provisions. They're running low on food. Everyone's really struggling. It's not great. So Charles Stanton, he's the single guy, the bachelor from Chicago. He's like, hey, I'm going to go ahead to our final location, Sutter's Fort. I'm going to get food or whatever, supplies, and then I'm going to come back. People were worried about that because he didn't have any family or anything in the party. So they were worried that, he would get to Sutter's Fort and then change his mind and be like, that was so hard, I'm not going back. But they took the risk and Charles Stanton went ahead. And you know what? Our boy came back.
He did.
He's a good man. He's a good man, Savannah. Charles Stanton returned, okay? And he brought supplies and provisions, and he also brought two Miwok guides, Louis and Salvador. And they were vaqueros, which is basically cowboys. They really knew the area, they knew the land, this is where they're from. They were, good guides. They knew how to live off the land, all that good stuff. So, with Charles Stanton back, with Louis and Salvador, they were approaching the Sierra Nevada. which was the last part of their journey, but of course, the hardest part of their journey. The Sierra Nevada was like nothing they had ever seen before. Granite cliffs, I mean like almost vertical, like wild fucking shit. But in California, something interesting happened. James Reed was actually already there.
Okay.
He had been like saved by this guy, or I don't know if it was like a friend or it was just some person, and they had one horse and they switched off who would walk and who would sit on the horse, and it took a long time, and it was bad, but he got to California and he wanted to help his family and the whole Donner Party because he knew that it was going to be really hard and that they were already struggling when he left. So he wanted to help them, but he thought too, he was like, if they're, running too late, I mean, they're going to have the sense to just make camp further down, not up in the mountains, and just stay there until the snow melts. They have a bunch of cattle, they can, slaughter and butcher them as they need to. They can hunt, they'll be fine. Except that wasn't the case anymore. He didn't know that they had already lost 30 head of cattle. But I don't know exactly if he was kind of like pressured into it or if it was, pride. People really loved America, they were all for it. So he went along to fight in the Mexican-American War because, America's trying to steal California and all those states from Mexico. A lot of people were like, this is immoral, but, President Polk was like, we're taking it. So it's tough. So the party continues towards the Sierra Nevada, but they kind of break up into 3 groups. Not necessarily like on purpose, but that would just kind of happen sometimes when they were on the trail. It wasn't like they were always together the whole time. It would be like maybe one group would be a little bit ahead and one would be a little bit behind, and then like maybe 2, families were together or whatever, and then they would all get together at night.
Yeah, it wasn't just like a straight line.
Yeah. So this is normal that this happened. They kind of just like happened to break up into 3 groups. And these are the groups. As they pushed up the Truckee River Canyon, they separated into at least 3 groupings. The Breen family, along with the Kesselbergs, the Eddies, and Patrick Dolan, were out front. Sarah and Jay Fosdick, the Graveses, Margaret Reed and her children, the Murphys, Charles Stanton, Lewis, and Salvador formed a middle group. Margaret Reed and some of her smaller children rode on the mules that Stanton had brought from Sutter's. The Donner brothers and their teamsters lagged behind the others in the 3rd group. So that's kind of important. Once again, you don't need to remember everyone's names or whatever, but it'll be very an important piece of info that there were 3 separate groups during this time. So everyone kind of realizes we don't have enough food. So let's send off another relief effort to bring some. But it was 2 brothers-in-law, William Pike and William Foster. They were getting ready to go, and Foster's gun accidentally discharged, and he shot his brother-in-law, William Pike, in the back.
Like the luck these people have.
I know.
It's awful.
And it was also like a very traumatic death. Like it wasn't fast, and he suffered. And everyone just watched because it said in the book that they wanted to just kill him. They wanted to put him out of his misery like they would, like a deer or whatever. But he was Christian and they were Christian, and they thought that would still be considered murder. So they didn't do it. They just waited for him to die. And so that was a lot.
His own brother-in-law. Oh my God.
Yeah, totally by accident. These guns were horrible. They would just discharge accidentally all the time.
Oh.
So it's was once again bad luck that it actually hit him. So the group continued forward and they arrived at Truckee Lake. It's now called Donner Lake, and you'll see why in a little bit. This lake is near where Reno is today. They got there in late October, and the snow there had started on October 7th, which was actually a month earlier than it used to snow there, at least at that time. So on October 29th or 30th, the people in the survivors kind of have a differing view about which day it was, but the lead group went ahead to make it through the pass, but there was a huge snowstorm, and it made it nearly impossible to move. The snow went up to the oxen's chests, so they had to turn around. Then some of the people, they were just straight up sleeping outside at this point. And on November 3rd, they woke up to a bunch of snow that morning, and they knew they were fucked. They missed their shot to get through the Sierra Nevada by 2 days.
Oh no.
Even with all of those setbacks and delays and everything, they still were so close to making it. If only some of that, just a couple of those fucking bullshittery things didn't happen, this would never have happened. It would still be called Truckee Lake.
Oh my God.
Mm-hmm. So our players know they're in danger. They're worried about what's going to happen next. They're cold, they're hungry, and they're about to be desperate. We'll see more on Volume 2.
Wow, Maureen. Thank you so much. Good golly, folks. We are now on the precipice.
We literally are.
Of true hell. Volume 2.
It's going to be... it's gruesome.
It is gruesome, and it is harrowing, and it is just tragic.
But at the same time, it is so fascinating.
Yes.
To see what human beings do in these desperate situations. And it's also amazing to see like the strength and the will to live that these people had, and the need to save their children. I mean, it's amazing what these people did. And I'm very excited to talk about it next week.
That's right. Yes. And it will be next week. I know how we do the bi-weekly thing with the mini episode in between, but whenever we do a two-parter or something that's multiple parts, we'll always do the next part the next week. You won't have to wait 2 weeks for this.
Yeah.
It's coming next week, folks. God dang.
Woo!
Let me tell you something, Maureen.
What?
I got a list of names I wouldn't mind sharing a covered wagon with.
Okay, go on.
Folks, give it on up for our top-tier Patreon subscribers. Of course, the Dream James Watkins, the Finnish Face Via Lundqvist, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Vivacious Vicky McHugh, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the oh-so-suave Sean Richardson, the British Bone Breaker Bex Martin, the Notorious Nicholas Barker, the Terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the Sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare of New Zealand Noeline Vivilli, the Loathsome Johnny Love, the Carnivorous Kevin Bogey, the Killer Stud Carl Staub, the Firestarter Heather Carter, the Conqueror Christopher Damian Damaris, the Awfully Awesome Annie, the Murderous Maggie Leach, the Serve Sexy Sam Hackworth, the Evil Elizabeth Riley, Lauren Hellfire Hernandez Lopez, the Maniacal Laura Maynard, the Vicious Karen Van Buren, the Arch Nemesis Aaron Bird, the Sadistic Sergio Castillo, the Rapscallion Ryan Crum, the Beast Benjamin Huang, the Devilish Chris Doucette, the Psycho Sam, the Electric Emily Zhang, the Ghoulish Gerd Hankum, the Renegade Corey Ramos, the Crazed Carlos, the Antagonist Andrew Park, the Monstrous Michaela Shearer, the Witchy Wonder J.P. Weimer, the Freaky Ben Forsyth, the Barbaric Andrew Barry, the Mysterious Marcella, and the Hellacious Cale Hoffman.
Woo! Thank you so much. Our top-tier Patreon subscribers, wow. You guys are beautiful, intelligent, and very kind. All of our Patreon subscribers, we love you. And all of our listeners, gosh darn it, we love you so much. Thanks for listening. And please spread that good word of Creep Street.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
Good night and goodbye.
Bye.